Wanted to make a quick video with a few clarifications about the relationship between Black sexual politics, white male supremacy, colonization, negritude, and modernism. That's quite a lot. So let me try to stick to a few texts to explain this concept, because these concepts I find useful if you are interested in further exploring the visual arts from the Harlem Renaissance, and also if you're interested in a mock trial point of view where you might try Mrs. Turner or the white ladies in the novel. And I'll explain that a little bit as I go along. I have added here in week 10, Respectable Ladies, this document. Pardon the children in the background. Excuse me, what did I just say? You're going to be in big trouble if you don't stop it. This is something we talked about that has greater discussion in our recording from March 30th. It is a chapter by sociologist Patricia Hill Collins. She's a central figure in Black feminist thought. Of course, we shouldn't have to say Black feminist thought. Feminism should be inclusive, but the contributions that Black women have made to improving feminism and kind of like African American culture has improved what it means to be American, perhaps deserve the additional Black feminist term. Anyway, what Hill Collins is talking about, and this is an older article from 1990, so this is, as we discussed in class, not about the intellectual woke activist Beyonce, but about the early Beyonce, who was an incredibly beautiful young woman in a group called Destiny's Child. She also mentions Jennifer Lopez, and then she goes back in time a little bit to talk about Josephine Baker, and finally, even further back, to talk about a woman named Saartjie Baartman, who was a South African woman that some European promoters kind of kidnapped from South Africa and traveled around Europe displaying like a circus freak show because she had a particularly large bottom, buttocks, rear end. I don't know a really great term for it, but essentially fetishizing someone's body, and particularly a part of the body such as the buttocks, and I'm just going to go ahead and use that term, plays into a pattern of hypersexualizing Black women and creating a space for Black women's sexual desirability and attractiveness that focuses on an exotic representation of the body. So that is in large part what we have so far in these first few pages. Very easily, the larger buttocks turn into a freak of nature, as in the case with Saartjie Baartman. And part of the point of talking about buttocks in general is that we have a predisposition and a stereotype in American culture that I think is pretty inaccurate, that white women have smaller hips and thighs and rear ends, flat bottoms, whereas Black women are more voluptuous and curvy. And this is not universally true. It's not guaranteed. There are plenty of white women with those curves, just people don't notice it so much. We are kind of trained to think about this as a characteristic of women of color. And the reason for that, as Hill Collins goes on to explain to us, is that when European countries decided to colonize the rest of the world, as is in the case with Sarah Baartman in South Africa that was colonized by white Europeans, part of the work of colonization is to create categories and social constructions of racial difference. A wild Black sexuality justifies a white Christian Anglo-Saxon civilizing mission because white Christian Anglo-Saxon civilizers claim to do a favor in Africa, in South America, in India, wherever, by making these darker races conform to certain moral standards. At the same time, white culture, dominant culture, tends to fetishize and exoticize the bodies of people of color. So that in itself is just hypocritical. But the point here is that part of the work of colonialism, and colonialism means for one nation to subjugate and control another, is to develop stories, justifications for why colonialism is a good idea. This is a civilization and primitivism argument. And Hill Collins does a fascinating job of explaining how Black women's bodies and Black women's sexuality fit into that particular mode of white Anglo-Saxon supremacy, which also justifies colonialism. Now, when we think about the white women, in their eyes, we're watching God. Are they really there to support Janie, or are they there as accomplices to the white men that are trying to control Black people? I think that's pretty much a rhetorical question. But what do white women get from participating in white male supremacy? White women get to go on a pedestal. They get supposed protection from white men, and the image of white women as more pure, civilized, Christian, self-controlled, because they control and allow men to control their bodies, is part of what white women gain from this equation. It gives them some relative status and social power if they conform to ideas of bodily control, restraint, asexuality, Christian morality, etc. Now, really, this denial of the body, I think we're learning more and more, is really unhealthy, leads to eating disorders, leads to sexual assault and rape culture. That's a big leap, but I think we'll make it someday to understand that. And also leads to a hatred of the body, particularly among white women, that is tremendously toxic and dangerous. As in contrast to Janie's relationship to her body, in their eyes, we're watching God, that really flowers and expands and celebrates her desires and her physicality. So Patricia Hill Collins kind of helps explain that concept. This is long, so I'm going to leave it. And I hope you find it helpful.